The average American family throws out hundreds of dollars in spoiled groceries every single year. Almost everything that ruins fresh food comes down to moisture, ethylene gas, or a spot in the kitchen that's just a little too warm. And every trick in today's video fixes one of those three problems directly. 35. Potatoes in a dark, cool spot away from onions. Potatoes sprout and turn soft far faster than most people realize once they sit near the wrong neighbor in the pantry. Store potatoes in a dark, well-ventilated spot like a cardboard box or paper bag, and always keep them at least a few feet away from onions, since the two were never meant to share the same basket, no matter how convenient it seems. Onions release gases that speed up sprouting in nearby potatoes, so separating them slows that process dramatically. Check the bag weekly and pull out any potato that started to soften, since one going bad tends to speed up the rest. 34. Celery wrapped in aluminum foil. Did you know that there's a way to stop celery from going limp within days of bringing it home? Wrap the entire bunch tightly in aluminum foil instead of the plastic bag it came in, then store it in the crisper drawer. Foil allows the natural ethylene gas celery releases to escape rather than trapping it against the stalks the way plastic does. Rewrap the bunch fresh each time you use a portion, and it stays crisp for weeks longer than a bagged bunch ever would. 33. Fresh herbs standing in a glass of water. Store-bought herbs wilt within days, but treating them like cut flowers changes everything about how long they last on the counter. Trim the stems, stand the bunch upright in a glass with an inch of water, and loosely cover the leaves with a thin plastic bag before setting it on the counter, away from direct sun. Herbs continue drawing up water through their stems even after being cut, which keeps them hydrated far longer than a bag alone. Change the water every couple of days, and parsley or cilantro can last 2 to 3 weeks this way. 32. Bread stored cut side down. Grandma always set a cut loaf back down on its open face rather than leaving it exposed to the air. Placing the sliced side against the cutting board or a plate slows moisture loss from the exposed crumb, keeping the bread from drying out as fast. Store the loaf this way on the counter in a cloth bag or bread box rather than sealed plastic, which traps too much moisture and encourages mold instead. A loaf kept this way stays soft for several extra days past when it would normally turn stale. 31. Apples kept away from other produce. Apples are one of the biggest culprits behind produce spoiling early, and it has nothing to do with the apples themselves going bad. They release large amounts of ethylene gas as they ripen, which speeds up ripening and spoilage in nearby fruits and vegetables sitting in the same bowl or drawer, sometimes cutting their shelf life in half without anyone realizing why. Store apples in their own bag in a separate part of the fridge, away from everything else. This one separation alone can add several extra days of freshness to the rest of your produce. 30. A paper towel in the crisper drawer. Excess moisture is the enemy of nearly everything sitting in a crisper drawer, and a folded paper towel solves it instantly without costing a single extra cent. Line the bottom of the drawer with a paper towel before adding produce, and tuck another one in with bagged greens specifically. The towel absorbs condensation that would otherwise collect and speed up rot, especially with leafy vegetables. Swap the towel out once it feels damp, usually every few days, and produce noticeably outlasts what it would in a bare drawer. 29. Eggs stored pointy end down. Did you know that simply flipping your egg carton can extend how long your eggs stay fresh? Store eggs with the pointed end facing down rather than up, keeping the air pocket at the wider end on top where it belongs, exactly the way cartons are designed to sit in the first place. This keeps the yolk centered and away from the air pocket, slowing the rate at which the egg loses moisture and quality over time. Keep them in their original carton on a shelf inside the fridge rather than the door, since the door swings open too often and exposes eggs to temperature shifts. 28. Lettuce wrapped with a paper towel. A head of lettuce turns slimy fast. Once trapped moisture builds up inside its bag, sometimes within just a day or two of bringing it home from the store. Wrap the lettuce loosely in a dry paper towel before placing it back in its bag or container, then store it in the crisper drawer. The towel absorbs the moisture the lettuce naturally releases, which is exactly what causes those brown, slimy spots to form. Replace the towel once it's fully damp, and a head of lettuce treated this way easily lasts twice as long as one left in its original bag. 27. Mushrooms stored in a paper bag. Mushrooms are especially sensitive to trapped moisture, and the plastic container they're sold in works against them from the start. Transfer mushrooms into a plain paper bag as soon as you get home, folding the top over loosely rather than sealing it shut, the exact same way Grandma always transferred hers the moment she got back from the market. Paper allows the mushrooms to breathe and release moisture instead of sweating inside a sealed container, which is exactly what causes them to turn slimy within a couple of days. Stored this way in the fridge, mushrooms commonly stay firm for a full week or more. 26. Bananas with wrapped stems. A bunch of bananas ripens all at once, mostly because of gas released right at the stem, not because of anything happening to the individual fruit itself. Wrap the very top of the stem cluster tightly in plastic wrap or foil as soon as you bring the bananas home. This traps the ethylene gas released at the stem instead of letting it spread evenly across every banana in the bunch. Bananas wrapped this way ripen noticeably slower and more evenly, buying an extra few days before they turn overripe all at once. 25. Tomatoes stored stem down at room temperature. Grandma never once put a fresh tomato in the refrigerator, and there was good reason for it. Store tomatoes stem side down on the counter at room temperature, away from direct sunlight, rather than in the fridge where so many people assume they belong. Cold temperatures break down the membranes inside a tomato, turning the flesh mealy and dulling its flavor within days. Setting its stem down also helps seal in moisture at the scar left behind from picking, which slows spoilage from that spot specifically. 24. Berries rinsed in a vinegar bath before storing. Berries mold faster than almost any other fruit because of the microscopic spores already sitting on their surface long before you ever bring them home. Soak berries in a mix of 1 part white vinegar to 3 parts water for a few minutes, then rinse well and dry completely before storing. The vinegar kills the mold spores responsible for that fuzzy growth days later without leaving any taste behind once rinsed. Store the dried berries in a container lined with a paper towel, and they'll often last a full week longer than berries stored straight from the store container. 23. Carrots stored in a jar of water. Limp carrots come back to life with a trick most people never think to try, even though it takes less than a minute to set up. Trim the ends, place the carrots upright or on their side in a jar or container, and fill it with enough water to cover them completely. Submerged carrots stay hydrated the same way a cut flower does, keeping them crisp for weeks rather than days. Change the water every few days, and carrots stored this way in the fridge can genuinely last a month or longer. 22. Garlic kept in a cool, dark, ventilated spot. Garlic behaves nothing like most produce, and refrigerating it is one of the fastest ways to ruin a bulb, something Grandma understood long before anyone ever wrote it down in a cookbook. Store whole garlic bulbs in a mesh bag or an open basket somewhere cool, dark, and away from direct sunlight, never sealed in plastic or tucked in the fridge. Good airflow keeps moisture from building up around the cloves, which is exactly what causes garlic to sprout or turn moldy early. Stored properly this way, a whole bulb of garlic can stay usable for several months at a time. 21. Butter kept fresh in a water crock. Grandma kept butter soft and spreadable on the counter using nothing but a small crock of water, long before anyone owned a butter dish with a lid. Pack softened butter into the top half of a butter keeper, then fill the bottom half with fresh water and seal the two pieces together. The water forms an airtight barrier that blocks oxygen from reaching the butter, which is what normally causes it to turn rancid at room temperature. Change the water every few days, and butter stored this way stays fresh and spreadable for up to 2 weeks without ever touching the fridge. 20. Milk stored toward the back of the fridge. Milk spoils faster than it should when it's stored in the one place almost everyone keeps it, right in the door shelf built specifically to hold it. Move milk to a shelf toward the back of the fridge instead of the door, where temperatures swing the most every time the fridge opens. The back of the fridge stays consistently colder since it's furthest from the warm air that rushes in with every open door. This one change alone can add several extra days of freshness to a carton of milk. 19. Hard cheese wrapped in vinegar-soaked cloth. Have you ever noticed how quickly a block of hard cheese picks up mold once it's wrapped the wrong way, even when it's kept in a perfectly cold fridge the whole time? Dampen a clean cloth with a small amount of white vinegar, wring it out well, and wrap it loosely around the cheese before placing it in a container in the fridge. The mild acidity discourages mold growth on the surface without affecting the flavor of the cheese underneath. Replace the cloth once a week, and a block of hard cheese treated this way easily outlasts one left in its original plastic wrap, often by 2 extra weeks or more. 18. Herbs hung upside down to dry. Grandma preserved a whole garden's worth of herbs each fall using nothing but string and a dry corner of the kitchen, long before anyone owned a dehydrator. Gather small bundles of herbs, tie the stems together, and hang them upside down somewhere dark with good airflow for 1 to 2 weeks. Hanging them upside down keeps the natural oils concentrated in the leaves instead of draining back toward the stem as they dry. Once fully dried and crumbly, store the leaves in a sealed jar, and they'll stay flavorful for a full year or more. 17. Root vegetables packed in a box of sand. Carrots, beets, and turnips can last through an entire winter with an old root cellar trick that predates refrigeration by more than a century. Layer slightly damp sand in the bottom of a wooden box or crate, nestle the root vegetables in without letting them touch, then cover with another layer of sand. The sand holds just enough moisture to keep the vegetables from drying out while blocking the air exposure that speeds up spoilage. Stored this way in a cool space, root vegetables commonly stay firm for several months at a time. 16. Avocado halves sealed with lemon juice. Half an avocado turns brown within hours unless it's protected the right way, usually long before you're even ready to use the rest of it. Brush the exposed flesh generously with fresh lemon juice, then press a piece of plastic wrap directly onto the surface before refrigerating. The acid in the lemon juice slows the oxidation that causes browning, while the plastic wrap blocks air from reaching the flesh at all. Stored this way, half an avocado can stay green and usable for 2 to 3 extra days instead of turning brown by morning. 15. Citrus fruit wrapped loosely in the crisper. Oranges, lemons, and grapefruits dry out faster than expected once they sit exposed in an open fruit bowl on the counter for more than a few days. Wrap citrus fruit loosely in a plastic bag with a few small holes poked in for airflow, then store it in the crisper drawer instead of the counter. The loose wrap slows moisture loss from the peel without trapping so much humidity that mold sets in. Citrus stored this way commonly stays juicy for 3 to 4 weeks longer than fruit left sitting out at room temperature. 14. Corn stored still in the husk. Did you know that leaving corn exactly as it came from the field keeps it sweeter far longer? Store fresh corn in the fridge with the husk still fully intact, resisting the urge to shuck it until you're ready to cook, no matter how tempting it is to peek at the kernels first. The husk protects the kernels from drying out and slows the natural conversion of sugar into starch that dulls corn's sweetness over time. Corn stored this way stays noticeably sweeter and juicier for up to a week compared to just a day or two once shucked. 13. Cabbage wrapped in newspaper. A whole head of cabbage can outlast almost every other vegetable in the crisper with one old-fashioned wrap that costs nothing but a few days-old newspaper. Wrap the entire head loosely in a few sheets of newspaper before placing it in the fridge, rather than leaving it bare or sealed in plastic. The paper absorbs excess moisture released by the outer leaves while still letting the cabbage breathe. Wrapped this way, a whole head of cabbage commonly stays fresh for a month or longer in the crisper drawer. 12. Fresh ginger, frozen whole. Ginger root dries out and turns fibrous within a couple of weeks sitting on the counter, but freezing solves that completely without any special equipment needed. Place the whole, unpeeled root directly in a freezer bag and store it in the freezer rather than the fridge. Freezing halts the drying process entirely, and the texture stays firm enough to grate straight from frozen whenever a recipe calls for it. Stored this way, a single piece of ginger can last 6 months or longer without ever going to waste. 11. Green beans stored in a paper bag. Fresh green beans turn soft and rubbery fast once trapped inside their original plastic packaging, often within just 2 or 3 days of bringing them home. Transfer green beans into a paper bag as soon as you bring them home, folding the top loosely rather than sealing it. The paper wicks away the moisture that beans naturally release, which is exactly what causes them to go limp within days in plastic. Stored in the crisper this way, green beans commonly stay snappy and fresh for a week to 10 days. 10. Cucumbers wrapped in a dry cloth. Cucumbers are mostly water, which makes them especially prone to going soft and slimy in the fridge if they're stored the way most people assume is correct. Wrap each cucumber individually in a dry cotton cloth or towel before placing it in the crisper drawer, rather than leaving it bare or in plastic. The cloth absorbs the condensation that builds up on the cucumber's skin, which is what triggers that slimy texture at the ends. Wrapped this way, cucumbers commonly stay firm for 10 days to 2 weeks instead of going soft within a few days. 9. Nuts stored in the freezer. Nuts turn rancid faster than most pantry staples because of the natural oils packed inside them, especially once warmer weather sets in during the summer months. Store shelled nuts in an airtight bag or container in the freezer rather than a cabinet shelf, especially in warmer months. Cold temperatures slow down the oxidation process that causes those oils to spoil and develop a bitter, off taste. Nuts stored this way can stay fresh for up to a year compared to just a few months sitting out at room temperature. 8. Fresh fish nestled over ice. Grandma never trusted a plain refrigerator shelf alone to keep fresh fish at its best, not when a simple bowl of ice could do so much more of the work. Place fresh fish in a shallow dish set inside a larger bowl filled with ice. Then refrigerate the whole setup and replace the ice as it melts. This keeps the fish colder than the refrigerator's regular temperature alone would manage, slowing bacterial growth considerably. Prepared and stored this way, fresh fish stays at its peak for an extra day or two beyond what a plain shelf would allow. 7. Meat stored on the bottom shelf. Where meat sits inside the fridge matters just as much as how it's wrapped, and it's one of the most overlooked details in an otherwise careful kitchen. Store raw meat on the lowest shelf, ideally in a tray to catch any drips, since that's consistently the coldest part of most refrigerators. The bottom shelf stays coldest because cool air naturally sinks, while the upper shelves indoors see the most temperature fluctuation. Keeping meat here rather than on a middle shelf extends its safe storage window by a meaningful day or two. 6. Buttermilk frozen in ice cube trays. Leftover buttermilk from a recipe doesn't have to go to waste before you need it again, even if it's just a small amount left over in the carton. Pour any extra buttermilk into an ice cube tray and freeze it solid, then transfer the cubes into a freezer bag once they're set. Freezing halts spoilage completely, and a single cube thaws quickly whenever a recipe calls for just a splash. Buttermilk preserved this way stays perfectly usable in baking for several months instead of spoiling on the counter within a week. 5. Peas and beans left in their pods. Shelling peas or beans the moment you bring them home actually speeds up how fast they lose their sweetness, even though it feels like the more efficient way to prep them. Leave peas and beans in their pods, storing them unshelled in a paper bag in the crisper drawer until you're ready to cook them. The pod acts as natural protection, slowing both moisture loss and the conversion of sugar into starch that dulls their flavor. Left this way, peas and beans stay noticeably sweeter and fresher for several extra days compared to shelling them right away. 4. Flour kept bug-free with a bay leaf. Did you know that a single dried leaf tucked into your flour can keep it fresh for months? Drop one whole bay leaf directly into a sealed container of flour before storing it in the pantry, a trick that costs next to nothing and takes only a few seconds. The strong scent released by the leaf is unpleasant to the tiny moths and weevils that lay eggs in dry goods, keeping them from taking hold in the first place. Replace the bay leaf every few months, and flour stored this way stays fresh and pest-free far longer than a bag left untreated. 3. Onions stored in old stockings. Grandma kept an entire bag of onions fresh for months using nothing but a worn-out pair of stockings she'd otherwise have thrown away. Drop one onion into the toe of the stocking, tie a knot above it, then add another onion and tie again, repeating until the stocking is full. Hang the finished strand in a cool, dry pantry where air can move freely around each individual onion. When you need one, simply snip below the lowest knot and the rest stay perfectly preserved and untouched. 2. Bread kept fresh in a cloth bag. A loaf sealed in plastic actually goes stale and moldy faster than one given room to breathe, which surprises most people who assume plastic always means fresher. Store fresh bread in a simple cloth bag or a breathable bread box instead of a sealed plastic bag, keeping it somewhere cool and dry. Cloth allows just enough air circulation to prevent the trapped moisture that plastic causes, which is exactly what leads to mold forming within days. Bread stored this way stays fresh on the counter for the better part of a week before it starts to turn. 1. Rotating the pantry shelf front to back. Every trick on this list comes back to the one habit that mattered more than any single storage method, and it's the simplest one of all. Each time new groceries come in, move the older items to the front of the shelf or fridge and tuck the newest ones toward the back, rather than just piling everything in wherever there's room happens to be open. This simple system means nothing sits forgotten behind a taller box until it's already spoiled, which is how most wasted food actually happens in the first place. Get into this habit and everything else on this list works even better because nothing has the chance to be forgotten long enough to go bad. Which trick will you be trying this week? Let me know in the comments down below.